Hey, this time, this video is going to be about HuK and what I think his legacy is. So HuK was, in my opinion, one of the best foreigner players from early 2010 to early or mid 2012. I think the cutoff is NASL season three, where it was in where he loses to, I think, Alicia. Let me check. Yeah, he loses to Alicia in the round of 8 after beating Gonzi in the round of 16. And I'll just talk about him from that perspective, and then I'll talk about what I think his legacy is. So, HuK is a guy who, in terms of style, was similar to MC, very focused on control, very focused on the force fields. Actually, had pretty good control with a variety of compositions, so he generally preferred the gateway units, specifically the Sentry, Stalker, Zealot types. And because of that, and because of his early aggression, like his style matched up against a variety of different players early on, just because there was a lot more to figure out at the time, and he could abuse the timings, he could abuse the inefficiencies, and he could abuse the disparity in control, so to speak. He's also a player that people made fun of, like I think because he said he wanted to be like Boxer, which is not a problem. Just like it was such an ambitious statement to make that it was kind of crazy. But that's basically how HuK was, and HuK is definitely a guy who had that ambitious nature about him, and so that's something I respect. That's something that I think actually drives him forward in a lot of respects. Like similar to, I don't know if he'll enjoy the comparison, but fuck it, it's not like he'll hear this anyway. I think he's in that sense he's very similar to somebody like Naniwa, in the sense that they both really wanted to win, and they were both willing to do whatever it took to get there. So they both put in a lot of hours. They both went into Korea to train. They both played in the GSL, and they and then they both like kind of lose out in the round of 8. Even though I think both of them have better runs than say like Jinro's early round of 4s, right? Or even I'll have to go check, but anyway, that's kind of how I think of HuK as a player, and as for his downfall, I think it's because he, for whatever reason, like in terms of player strength, I think refining builds was probably his weakest moment, his weakest aspect. And so when the Kespa players come in, when Zerg, Broodlord Infestor comes in, when the game starts getting more and more refined as time goes on, you start seeing like he starts to fall behind, and the disparity in control is no longer enough to win him consistent games. And obviously by like mid 2012, there are plenty of guys I think who had better control than him. I don't think top 3 control was even that crazy of a statement to make when he made it, which was, I forget, like early 2011 or something. Because if you're just talking about Protoss, like there's MC, there's HuK, and then who else was there? Like it's not like Naniwa was a huge name yet to begin with, and the Protoss Koreans, like none of them were really that great until you start running into the Kespa era. Basically, like some of them were good, but in terms of control, they weren't spectacular. And then you go, and then it's like kind of weird to make a comparison between Terran and Zerg players, though. I'd probably say definitely for Terran, I don't mind saying I'm gonna guess ranking probably had better control than HuK, but that's a hard statement to make just because it's two different races. So it's not like you compare them head to head like that. And so that's kind of why HuK falls down, is because his greatest strength, control, micro control, that kind of goes away. His aggressive nature is still in there, but it's not as useful as time goes on, because people are getting better at playing defensively, and this isn't a guy who could play super refined strategies and builds. And in that sense, he probably might have been better off as maybe a Zerg player, because you can kind of get away with that sometimes, but definitely not as a Protoss player, where things can like live or die off of an extra force field you gained from like a very specific kind of build order, especially in 2012 against the Broodlord Infestor era. And HuK's an interesting player in terms of winning mentality because I think he had one of the better ones among among the best foreigners. Actually, I think let me look through it. I think he probably had the second best after Stefano because I think Stefano's was the best. He was always the most composed. He was always the guy who was least affected by his environment. And HuK was Naniwa, like the guy behind him. He was great all the way until the finals, and the finals he choked, or yeah, basically choked. And Snoot definitely has like some performance issues, even though I think in terms of skill, he's probably, in my opinion, the best we've ever seen. Scarlett definitely not. Um, Definitely doesn't have that winner's mentality in the same sense as like HuK because yeah, she won the Olympic Games or whatever. And in terms of skill, I definitely think she was a bit higher up if we're just looking about at the peaks. But she was not a player who often went all the way. She was not a player who could like win in spite of whatever was going on. She generally like had to be in a better meta. She like basically retired from StarCraft 2 at a point, played Dota, then came back, stuff like this. So she definitely didn't have like that crazy ambition and that crazy winner's mentality that HuK did, at least for the early parts of his career, and even to the later parts, basically, because HuK was a guy who always got defensive about his own skills, just because he, on some level, believes and probably still believes he probably could have done more than he did. And even though I just think he was just a solid player from 2013 onwards, basically. So yeah, that's basically HuK and my view of him as a player. And as far as legacy, I think he's going to go down, in my opinion, as either at worst a top four all time great foreigner player, or at best a top three all time great foreigner player. And it depends on the criteria. Like I favored Snoot, but there's definitely a case for HuK, and HuK as third. I don't think there's as much of a case for him being placed above Naniwa or Stefano, but definitely a case for him above Snoot if you wanted to make one. And you can kind of see like he's that's that kind of winner's mentality has transitioned in a sense since he's gone over to Overwatch. Just watching his team, just hearing the interviews about how his players talk about him, how like he's always like talking about like we have to win, like we have to beat everybody, anybody, stuff like this. It sounds very similar to his StarCraft 2 days, just not quite as wild. And yeah, I think that's a good way to end it. This is a guy who was one of the best foreigners in early StarCraft 2, who kind of like makes his mark there, kind of, and his identity resonates with a bunch of StarCraft 2 fans early on. And that mentality, even though he's no longer a top player, that mentality seems to have carried forward in his career as the manager of Boston Uprising. All right, so that's how I think about HuK, his legacy, and all that. See you guys later.